Are you involved in this? And then they say I know that Cameron know about the law, and I think
We'll begin today with a short presentation by our plaintiffs, the legal team, and other Ebrahim Raisi's victims before getting to your questions in the press. The Islamic Republic's 43-year rule, or more aptly, reign of terror, has been marked by two consistencies: grotesque violations of human rights and a total lack of any semblance of justice. Today, we gather to highlight the former and to begin to remedy the latter. We are here today to announce and outline in detail a historic federal civil lawsuit against Ebrahim Raisi, the President of the Islamic Republic in Iran. As Iranians are still mourning last week's brutal murder of the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, beaten into a coma and left brain dead by the Islamic Republic's morality police for bad hijab, today is a painfully poignant time for us to be gathered here today. 1 month ago, Ebrahim Raisi, who arrived yesterday in New York, signed into law a decree establishing new, more forceful methods of enforcement of social control over Iranian women. When Raisi signed this newest codification of the Islamic Republic's gender apartheid into law, he was also signing Mahsa's death warrant. Mahsa was beaten to death and into a coma and left brain dead until she succumbed to the wounds that Khamenei and Raisi's men inflicted on her. But the horrors that these two men and their regime have visited on Iranians in the past 4 decades have occurred both in the streets and in torture cells, with lashes and lacerations, with bullets and batons, with knives and nooses. And many are unknown. But what we do know is what the Islamic Republic and Ebrahim Raisi did to so many of them: torture. That, among other charges, is what we are here to discuss today. The unprecedented unity of the Iranian people that they're showing right now on the streets of cities and towns across the country as we speak, as their nationwide anti-regime and pro-democracy protests spread in response to the brutal murder of Mahsa. Here today, we also have a remarkable exhibition of unity. The plaintiffs in this case, Iranian dissidents, former Iranian hostages, former Western hostages, are coming together in an unprecedented fashion to take a step forward for justice, echoing the cries we hear today on the streets of Iran: don't be afraid, don't be afraid, we're all together. Let's first discuss why we are here today. Mahsa's brutal murder last week and the testimony you will hear from other of Ebrahim Raisi's victims shortly highlight the first consistency of the Islamic Republic: its grotesque violations of human rights. But it is the second constant, its denial of any semblance of justice, that brings us to Midtown Manhattan and brings this historic lawsuit to the Southern District of New York. The plaintiffs in this case, like all of the Islamic Republic's victims in the past 43 years, have been unable to pursue justice directly from those who have aggrieved them in such unspeakable ways. When it comes to this regime's human rights violations, we often hear condemnations from Western politicians which are accompanied by calls on the Iranian government to hold the perpetrators accountable. What these calls ignore is that it is the Iranian government itself, and often in leading positions within it, Ebrahim Raisi, who has perpetrated these crimes. Calls on the Iranian people to seek accountability and justice from their own aggressors are as foolish as they are insulting, especially as the people of Iran right now chant freedom, freedom, freedom. So deny justice from the Iranian government, like all others before them, The plaintiffs today are seeking justice in the American justice system. That is why here at Nufti, as an Iranian-American organization, we view it as our duty to help them and aid them in this effort that they have led. Before I pass the microphone to the panel, it is important to highlight the political context in which this lawsuit is being filed. This is a civil case against the person of Ebrahim Raisi, not the Islamic Republic, for actions that he has committed in numerous positions of service to that regime. From his time as a young, zealous revolutionary, to a low-level prosecutor, to the deputy chief justice, to the prosecutor general, to the chief justice itself. He has served Ruhollah Khomeini, Ali Khamenei, and their revolutionary regime dutifully. He has mainly served in functions of what we in the United States may call the justice system. But as many of you know, the Islamic Republic is a complex and interconnected web of personal relationships, patronage relationships, and even competing factions. There is no separation of power, there is no division of ultimate authority, and all is controlled by the supreme leader. So the crimes Mr. Raisi stands accused of today have been committed sometimes at his direct command and other times with either his implicit or explicit support. Today you will hear from our attorneys and legal advisors, the plaintiffs in this case, and other victims of Mr. Raisi. I'd also like to thank Gisu Nia, the head of the Atlantic Council Strategic Litigation Project, for her counsel, guidance, and support on this project, and Marissa Carden-Weber, who advised the team on this case and is an international lawyer. And also, thanks to all of you for joining us today, particularly Princess Noor. First, before we begin, I give the floor to our lead plaintiff, Mr. Mehdi Hajati, and his fellow plaintiffs, if the team could please play the video.
عرض ادب و احترام دارم خدمت همه خبرنگاران و همه بینندگان. ابتدا قرار بود که در این فایل تصویری من از هر آنچه که بر من گذشت و بر خانواده‌ام گذشت در این سالها بگم که چگونه ما به این پرونده قضایی رسیدیم و به این طرح شکایت رسیدیم. به یک فایل تصویری هم ضبط کردیم، اما این میان قتل مهسا امینی رخ داد. این قتل اونقدر غم‌انگیز بود که من بی‌شرمانه میدونمش که به خودم به آنچه بر من گذشت به عنوان درد و رنج بپردازم وقتی که قتل یک هموطن رخ داد. و این شاید برای دستگاه قضایی آمریکا کاملا واضح باشه که در یک نظام سیاسی و اجرایی وقتی که قتلی چنین سیستماتیک رخ میده، بالاترین مقام اجرایی مسئول تمام مسئولیت حقوقی برگردنشه و امروز شما عملاً با یک مجرم مواجهید به نام ابراهیم رئیسی که آمر به قتل بوده و به استناد همین قتل هم میشه اعلام جرم کرد علیه آقای رئیسی. اما امیدوارم مناسبات دیپلماتیک و تنگناهای سیاسی مانع این نشه که یکی از عادلانه ترین دستگاه‌های قضایی دنیا زیر مجسمه عدالت بشینه و ناتوان از صدور حکم بازداشت و ناتوان از اعلام جرم علیه رئیس جمهور یک نظام سیاسی بشه که کارش شکنجه و جنایت علیه شهروندانی هست که بر اونها به زور دارن حکومت میکنن. خب در این سالها سختی‌های زیادی بر ما گذشت، از شیوه بازداشت بیرحمانه با اسلحه مقابل بچه‌ها، داد و فریاد بچه‌ها و که بارها و بارها در 2-3 بازداشت بعدی هم به همین شیوه بیرحمانه با اسلحه یا در خیابان حمله کردن به ما و بچه‌ها و خانواده، یا به منزل به شیوه مسلحانه ورود کردن. اما اینها برابر آن چیزی که برای مهسا امینی رخ داده هیچه و من شرم دارم حتی از به زبان آوردنش. و ببینید ما در چه سرنوشت تراژیکی گرفتار شدیم که این همه سختی رو هم که تحمل کردیم برابر جنایتی که در حق یک هموطنمون رخ داده به هیچ میپنداریم و شرم داریم حتی از به زبان آوردنش. امیدوارم دستگاه قضایی آمریکا یک بار دیگه ثابت کنه که عدالت براش مهمترین مؤلفه است و میتونه خودش را از زیر سایه مناسبات دیپلماتیک و مناسبات سیاسی بیرون بکشه و حکمی صادر کنه که در راستای تحقق عدالت باشه و نشون بده که عدالت بین آدمیان مرز نمیشناسه و اگر قرار یک مسئله بدون مرز باشه اون عدالت خواهد. به امید پیروزی، به امید اینکه ما بتونیم روزی تو سرزمینمون محکمه‌های عادلانه برای مجرمان این روزها برپا کنیم.
I'm a citizen of the UK and of Australia. In 2018, I travelled to Iran to attend an academic conference in my role as a lecturer at the University of Melbourne. As I was preparing to depart Iran on the 12th of September 2018, I was arrested at Imam Khomeini Airport by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I was interrogated overnight at a safe house facility in North Tehran, and I then spent 1 week imprisoned inside a hotel which was under the control of the Revolutionary Guards. Following that, I was transferred to the 2A unit of Evin Prison. I subsequently spent 23 months in this highly restrictive unit. Following that, I spent 3 months in the Qarchak public prison before being transferred back to the 2A unit for 5 weeks. I was ultimately sent back to Australia in a prisoner swap deal, having spent 2 years and 3 months deprived of my liberty, entirely unjustly, on no actual factual basis whatsoever. During this time, I suffered gross mistreatment, psychological and physical torture, the trauma of which remains with me to this day. Ebrahim Raisi was appointed head of Iran's judiciary some months after my initial arrest. He was head of Iran's judiciary during the 3 court sessions that I attended, and during my conviction and sentencing hearings, during the denial of my appeal, and during the transfer that I underwent to Qarchak prison. I therefore hold President Ebrahim Raisi ultimately responsible for the mistreatment and the injustice that was meted out to me. In court, there was an utter lack of any due process whatsoever. Evidence of the utter lack of rule of law which exists within Iran under the stewardship of Mr. Raisi. The judge, Abul Qasim Salavati, was clearly a puppet of the Revolutionary Guard Corps and not capable of making independent decisions. I was denied any access to my lawyer whatsoever to discuss my case. Indeed, I wasn't even aware that I had a lawyer until a couple of weeks before my second court hearing. The first court hearing comprised the reading out of the Bill of Indictment, which was translated for me into English. This was the moment that I learnt that I was being charged with espionage for the quote-unquote tyrannical Zionist entity. There was no evidence whatsoever to substantiate these charges. I was unable to present evidence in my own defence in this sham trial. No documents, no witness statements, nothing. Indeed, I didn't even understand what was happening in the trial because its proceedings were not translated into English for me, and I didn't speak Farsi, having been concluded. I eventually learnt that I'd been sentenced to 10 years in prison for these ludicrous charges. My appeal was rejected, and I wasn't even able to stand in front of a judge and make my appeal. It was a purely administrative matter. I was then subjected to 7 months of solitary confinement, month on month, following my verdict, despite Iranian law mandating that I be transferred at that moment to a public prison. In total, I spent 12 months of the 2 years and 3 months I had biological and physical tortures, and was routinely subjected to cruel and degrading and humiliating mistreatment. I was denied access to medical treatment. I was denied access to medication within Qarchak prison. Ebrahim Raisi was the head of the judiciary throughout this entire period. He is ultimately responsible for my mistreatment and most basic human rights, including under Iranian law. Ebrahim Raisi, in his capacity as head of judiciary, actually visited the 2A unit in Evin prison, where female prisoners requested a meeting with him. He declined to meet with them, and instead only visited the men. I am taking part in this lawsuit under the Torture Victim Protection Act in order to hold Ebrahim Raisi accountable for the official of the Islamic Republic of Iran he has perpetrated. Thank you.
Hello everybody. I would like to briefly explain what was going on during my prison time. During the first year I was kept in the section of 350. Actually, the prison time was always trauma, but the real trauma started from the events that happened in April 2014. The prison guard attacked our section to inspect our cellulas. they pushed us out of the cellulas to the prison yard, and they were throwing the prisoners on the ground, they were beating them, and one of the inmates was so badly beaten that his hand was dislocated. And in front of my eyes, I saw they were beating the inmates, and when I tried to stop them, they started cursing us, pushing me out of the section to the yard, and they started humiliating me. They were using bad words about me and the other prisoners as well. They really insulted us, and since then I couldn't really forget the events happening on that day. But actually the real trauma started when I was exiled to Rajai Shahr prison. During the first year in Rajai Shahr, I was kept in a section with 175 prisoners. We were kept in a dire humanitarian condition, and we were denied access to sanitary, to the health state treatment. The sanitary conditions in that section was really awful. There was only 3 bathrooms for 175 prisoners and 3 toilets, and they were extremely dirty. And really, we had to wait a long time until we had the turn to go take a shower. And there was no beds for us to sleep. We were sleeping on the ground, and the insects crawled everywhere. We were beaten by insects, and the section was actually the section, there was a lot of bed bugs in the section. They really sucked our blood, and we were really weakened, and we suffered from malnutrition as well. The meal was always a little bit lentil and with a lot of sands in it, and that I lost my teeth. My teeth were broken, and there was a little shop in the prison that the only thing the shop brought for the prisoners was a conserve of fish, and we had nothing else, and we didn't even have the glasses to drink water. We used the tins of those conserves to drink water, and that was a really dire condition. And yes, since then, at that section, almost 90% of the prisoners were sentenced to death. And the Wednesday was the day of the execution, and 2 days earlier, on Monday, prisoners were transferred to be executed. And I lived in a constant trauma in that section. I feel the execution. Since years, I actually have nightmares, and I see nightmares even in Belgium. I couldn't get rid of the nightmares. Every day or every week, I see the nightmares. They trying to take me to be hanged. I see in the nightmares they are torturing me. And when I was freed from the prison in Iran, I tried to do some therapy, but there was no effect actually. Now I've gotten habit to these nightmares. Not only me, but also my wife suffers from those nightmares. They exiled me, but that was my family who suffered the punishment as well, because that was difficult for them to access that prison. It was located in a bad location, that it was really hard to access the prison. After 1 year, I was transferred to the section of political prisoners. We had more or less the same difficulties over there, and we had no access to the newspapers, no access to the books, and I was an academician. I had to have access to the academic material, but there was absolutely nothing, and there wasn't even a television in the section. Yes, these are the most important things that I remember.
You've heard now, ladies and gentlemen, from our plaintiffs. Now you'll hear from Shahin Milani, an Iranian-American human rights attorney and the lead counsel for the plaintiffs in this case against Ebrahim Raisi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shahin Milani. I'm the attorney representing the plaintiffs that you just heard from. This really is about them and about Ebrahim Raisi. who has committed egregious human rights violations over several decades of his involvement in the Iranian system, most notably for the 1988 massacre of political prisoners. In this case, this is a civil suit, and he's being sued under the 1992 Torture Victim Protection Act. And basically, you've heard from the plaintiffs that they've been subjected to torture, various forms of torture, while he was in power, holding different offices in the Iranian judiciary. I really do not have much to add because, again, the focus is on the victims and on Ebrahim Raisi himself. He's being personally sued for his personal involvement. Again, this is not a suit against the Iranian government, as Cameron mentioned earlier. It is against him personally. So I'll be more than glad to answer any questions you might have later on in the event. Thank you.
Before we go to questions for the entire team, we're happy to have with us today Mr. Nizar Zaka, also a hostage formerly held by the Islamic Republic. Mr. Zaka, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. In fact, my story is like every single foreigner who was taken hostage in Iran. It's a systematic matter. I went to Iran. I was officially invited by the government of Iran to speak at a conference on women empowerment. I received an invitation by the vice president. I attend the conference, and on my way back to the airport, a car blocked my taxi and blindfolded me and put me and take me into a room. I don't speak Farsi, I don't know anything. They put me in a room. Later on, I found out that it was Evin prison. I was put in 2A for 4 years, 2 years in solitary confinement. The other 2 years, I was moved to the political section, which is called Ward 7, Section 12, is for political, or they call us security detainees. In fact, I spent in Evin 4 years. I have been, and during these 4 years, I never met one single criminal. I haven't seen one criminal. The only criminals I saw was the guards and the interrogators. Once I was taken, I was put in this room, and they kept me for days and days, interrogating me for things I don't know anything about. All what they wanted to make that I make a video that I am an American spy. They don't care why or anything. And as Kylie said, it's the same process. We go to Judge Salawati. We don't know what's going on. We don't speak Farsi. Even I speak Arabic. They don't want to talk to me in Arabic. They only want to talk to me in English because I am an American spy. So I spent during Salawati, I never knew what the charge. They never faced me with anything, except one time the judge was asking me a question, and he used the word jasusi, which is spy. I know it from Arabic. And the translator was telling me, because you do things that, like you cooperate with the US. I said, no, he said I am a spy. I was telling the interrogator. They don't even tell us what the discussion is about. If we didn't know this word, I would never know that they're charging me of being a spy. And another day they come, they want to hang me because I work in technology, and we used to work on programs promoting internet freedom. He said that I am doing bad on Earth and ifsadu fil ard, and that I should be killed. And then they took me forward to be killed. So this is how it happens. The first day they took me, they told me that someone else took my passport and left the country, so everybody thinks that I traveled, so nobody is going to ask for me. I better cooperate and do everything they want. Sign any agreement. It's worth nothing. It doesn't worth the ink that we're signing it with. All what they understand is force. We need to have we have hostages currently in Iran left behind. The only way we get our hostages back is by force. That's the only way, in my opinion, and I really hope that Siamak, Bakr, Murad, and Imad will get home soon. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you, Mr. Zaka. Finally, before we proceed anywhere in the world, unfortunately, and a victim of Raisi's justice system, Navid Mohebbi will touch on Iranians' collective trauma and the importance of legal campaigns like this in attempting to remedy it.
Thank you, Cameron. I would also like to thank our legal team, Shahin, Marisa, and Gisu for their excellent job. I have prepared a brief statement explaining why this legal campaign is important to me and, frankly, to so many Iranians. I will also touch upon Iranians' collective trauma over the past 43 years. So, with your permission, I'm going to read my statement. We all go through hard times these days, but if you're Iranian or even follow Iranian news, you have been exposed to continuous trauma over the course of the last 43 years. The heartbreaking murder of Mahsa shook the conscience of the Iranian society. Although this murder was heartbreaking, it was unfortunately no surprise to those of us who have been aware of and heard by the crimes of the Islamic Republic since they took power in 1979. We endured the torture of our loved ones, mass killings, and denial of our social and political rights. When we deal with the judicial system of the regime, we face the bitter truth that the interrogators, the prosecutors, and the judges are accomplices. The interrogators humiliated us and said that the judges would sentence us in whatever way the interrogators told them. We all remember how the hero Navid Afkari stood before the judge of his death and said, "I have evidence that I was somewhere else at the time of the murder." When he said this, the judge reacted with laughter and mockery. He knew that he was part of a stage court where the punishment of the defendant was already sealed and no evidence could change his fate. Thousands of Iranian mothers and fathers have had to mourn the death of their children at the hands of the regime. Other families never even got the closure of knowing what happened to their loved ones. Iranians were left to suffer in silence and loneliness. And we all wondered, isn't it the job of the criminal system to help victims and families to find ease and closure? This regime's quest to deprive the rights to a fair defense has brought unimaginable pain and suffering to each of us, with the goal that we would never have a normal life again. This deprivation of the right of Iranian people to defend themselves, this extreme effort from the regime to silence the loud and proud roars of Navid and those like him, was meant to cripple the Iranian people's honor and dignity. But that is not possible. With this lawsuit, the survivors and victims of the regime send a very clear message to the butchers of Tehran that we will never break our soul, our resilience, and the fight for our human dignity is not one that we will lose. I view the announcement of today's lawsuit as an attempt by the Iranian society to express its long-held cry. It is true that today only 3 cases are brought up to the court, but they represent thousands of Iranians whose rights to express justice, their right to express themselves, and their right to express their suffering has been taken away. As a prisoner in this regime's jails and someone sentenced under Raisi's injustice system, I have experienced and seen this firsthand. And I have seen the very worst of what this regime and Raisi have done to my compatriots. And I remember most painfully my own judge's refusal to let me even speak. his attempt to deny my agency. But that ends today. This litigation campaign is a step towards justice and an attempt to help victims regain their dignity. Regardless of the outcome of this legal campaign, the telling of our stories, and the victim impact statements that these plaintiffs recount today in front of the international media is a great victory for the appeal for justice and the justice restoration movement. Thank you very much.